So our estate Cabernet. This is what is comes from the front yard. So this wine, year in and year out, traditionally is made kind of 95 to 100% Cabernet. Once in a while, we will add a little bit of Cabernet Franc or Petit Verdot to it. We make such little Petit Verdot that, I mean, it wouldn't even be 1% on here if we do use it for that. But traditionally, in the last 7 years, we've probably done, gosh, like 92 cab, 8 cab franc, 95 cab, 5 cab franc, and a few years 100% varietal Cabernet Sauvignon. We have 3 different clones of Cabernet throughout our vineyard. Each of them grow a little bit differently, a little bit different flavor profile. And the reason why we planted the 3 different clones was we have 3 different soil types in the vineyard. And so you have to look at that. And when you're planting Cabernet or Merlot or any grape varietal, you want to match the specific clone of that grape to that soil or dirt, whether it's clay or alluvial soil or volcanic soil. All the trials and tribulations have been done. You can call up your neighbor, you can call up the lab and say, hey, what are you growing on clay in Bordeaux? Is it the same temperature there? What are your results? And people will tell you, hey, well, if you plant this one, you're going to get a little more red fruit. If you plant this one, it's going to be a little more blueberry, blackberry flavor profile. If you plant this one, you're going to get a higher yielding plant. And if you plant this one, it's going to be a little lower yielding plant. So you really kind of look at what is your end goal when planting. So this, for instance, is 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. This was the year of the 2017 fire. So this is the year that everybody around us lost their house. The vineyard next to us is completely gone. And luckily, the fire was on a Tuesday, and I believe we picked on Saturday. So that was a fire that no one saw coming. It was an electrical line fire that came down in the middle of a windstorm. And, about 90% of the valley was already picked. There's probably 10% of the valley that still had fruit out there. Those are going to be the producers, looking for a little bit more hang time or in a cooler area. But we knew we were ripe. We picked just as we would any other year. We picked on schedule. And then after that weekend on that Tuesday, the fire came through. So the 2017 as an overall vintage doesn't get a lot of good press. And I think, it's like anything else, like our 2011, the whole valley said it wasn't a great vintage, but we picked on time. And, it just depends on, I always think small producers can still make great wine, even in the worst of vintages. You do have to start with good grapes to make good wine, but you can't blanket a whole vintage in a whole AVA just on one storm, 2 storms, a fire, unless it was a specific weather pattern that was all year long. You just can't do it. So I'm happy. The 2017 is 100% Cabernet. On this wine, we traditionally use about 65 to 70% New French oak. We do look at our vineyard as far as the 5 different blocks. We bring them in all separately, even if it's the same day. We will crush those and put them into separate barrels that are all labeled. We have our 3rd block of the vineyard. First block is Petit Verdot. Second is Cab Franc. The 3rd block is our Clone 337 Cabernet Sauvignon. And that always produces the best fruit, we feel. So we do make about 200 cases of that wine on its own, and it's a little higher price point. And then our blocks 4 and 5 are our younger vines. So we bring them all in separately, put them in separate barrels. We're continuously looking at those until January. After that secondary fermentation takes place, we decide, okay, what is the best of the best? And we put that over here and say, okay, well, this is what we think is going to go into our reserve and our estate wine. And then we take, okay, what do we think we're going to do with this? It might be brighter in fruit and not as complex. It might not have as much oak on it. We put that aside and hope that it will go into our estate, but most likely it will go into the red blend. All the way up until we bottle the red blend and the Cabernet within a few weeks of each other. So we hope that it will go into the estate, but sometimes you just know that it's a better wine without certain grapes. And when you're tasting and you get that fine balance of, okay, we want to use a little bit of this and then all of the 337 and Clone 4, you just kind of figure it out. And I think it's, it's a curve. Sometimes Mother Nature throws you a curveball, and this side of the vineyard could be overly ripe because it didn't have as much shade because we have this big tree over here. And just picking it at the exact right time, it's kind of magical. And you don't really know until, you get in there, and you don't really have your eyes on it until after January. And then you've got 22 months to make that decision.
Yeah.
We use French oak. French oak, sorry. We use French oak. French oak, I think, is definitely, it's not as pungent as American oak. Some people like to use American oak on Zinfandel. Some people like to use it on their Cabernet. A good example of American oak is silver oak. So if you've ever had silver oak, a lot of people ask me all the time, what does American oak taste like, and what does, and how would I know if I like it or not? Silver oak is the classic American oak Cabernet. For me, I think it jumps out. It doesn't let the fruit shine personally. It gets a little piney for me. That's just my, lots of people drink that wine. Lots of people love that wine. It's a classic wine from Napa and Sonoma, and it does very well. So I think it's, finding the producer, finding the regiment. Why do I like that wine? Is it French oak or American oak? Finding the style. I always think our wine is very expressive upon release. So you can drink this wine much younger because we get the hottest days and coldest nights. Our fruit is going to be very ripe without letting it hang too long. The mountain fruits like Howell Mountain, Pritchard Hill, Diamond Mountain, all great places to grow grapes. But I think they get a little bit more tannin. And so when they release those wines, they need a little bit more time in the bottle to kind of soften up a little bit. Ours is very fruit forward, flush, nice velvety tannins.
Yeah, the tannins are incredibly smooth. You still feel the grip, but they're not clawing. They're not kind of gravelly, chalky. They're very, very slick. And I also get a lot of kind of like floral elements out of this. I get kind of that classic sort of like lavender violets sort of coming out of this wine. And this wine is at a slightly higher price point. And I'm sorry to, I guess, because we have a lot of consumers on the on the call, but when people are looking for wines such as this that are at a slightly higher price point than the Y3 line, what type of things, maybe even with regard to just Cabernet, would be good sort of guidelines almost for people to look for when they're looking to spend $40, $50, $60, $70 on a bottle of Napa Cab? Sure,
that's definitely a lot of money. I would ask the retailer. I would ask for their experience. So most of the retailers and people working in the stores have experience with those wines, whether they tasted it or not, which is probably a pretty good chance they have tasted it. At least maybe they gave it to a consumer and the consumer came back and said, I usually like this wine and this was nothing like it. They're going to be the best advice, I think, for you when you're in a shop is to ask someone. And sometimes I've been in some stores where they tried to feed you something that that is not my flavor profile, and I know enough to ask the question of why do you like this and what does it taste like? Or I generally I think it takes you back to giving them a little information like, hey, I'm looking for a light-bodied wine, a medium-bodied wine, or full-bodied wine. Giving them a price point of, hey, I'm comfortable spending $50. I've had a lot of the big box wines. I want to try a small producer. What do you recommend? And that's where we want to be. We want to be in shops like yours where you can help tell our story, and you can say, well, if you've had Vengi wines, you might like this. There's connection to the brand and the story of the family and the wine. And that's what wine is all about. It's about experience and asking those questions. And if you don't want to ask those questions, you don't have to, but that's why you build displays and create, creative marketing and stuff in hopes that someone will try the wine. But, we put our production rate on our label. It says 68 barrels, and 68 barrels is not a lot of wine. It's 1,800 cases. So, we've touched every single barrel, every single bottle of wine that comes off. And I think that means a lot when you're making, quality anything, whether it's you're cooking dinner for 10 people or 100 people. I mean, when you're cooking for 10, it's most likely going to be a little more robust, a little better, a little, it's not going to be, I don't want to say watered down, but it's much easier to cook for a dinner of 10 than it is 100. And so us making these small batch wines, I think we're producing some of the best stuff in Napa. I have lots of people compare our Block 3 to some of the best stuff that's out there that's 2-3 times the price. And I think the same with our Napa Cabernet, our Estate Cabernet that we just had. I will challenge anybody in the valley at the same price point. Our wines well over deliver for the price point. It's not easy to find a Napa Valley Cabernet that's Estate in the valley for $50 retail. It's just not. And the prices of grapes have gone up. We're in a great position. We bought this in the 90s, in the early 90s, and we treat this as, we want to be the entry level price point. We do get the high scores. We could raise the prices, but we want to have fun with this. We want to make it accessible to all of the public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's really amazing that you have a wine here that, I'm not going to call it specific brands, maybe Camus or something, but which I'm enjoying a lot more than maybe their standard vintage. But actually,
Sure.
Vintage is like, this is actually a question from the group as well. I know obviously weather changes year over year, and relative to 2016, or maybe what you even expect out of sort of the recent crop this year. I mean, what are you kind of potentially looking forward to out of the 2020 crop?
Sure. We get a lot of questions like this, especially from our club members, because they may say like, oh, well, I just had the 16 last night and I had the 17 tonight and I don't like it as much. Why is that? Well, you got to think about this. These are still very young wines. And yes, you will get some variation between vintages because of Mother Nature and whether it's a hotter summer, colder summer. But again, we're trying to produce a better wine every single year. We're trying to stay in a specific profile as well, because we don't want to shock the audience. But you also have to think, and I always have to remind people, if you tried the 16 and now you're trying the 17 and they're right next to each other, the 16 has been in a bottle for a whole year longer. And so that maturity of that being in that bottle is going to be a big difference. Yep. And we get people that buy our wine in the fall when we release it, and then they come back in late summer the following year and they say, oh my gosh, I just had my last bottle and it's fantastic. And I do think having that wine age in bottle makes a world of difference. And so, yes, it's accessible now, but this wine is, a living organism and it's going to change. And so, if you don't like something, give it a chance in, 6 months or a year. Don't just say, oh, I had that and I don't like it. The wines do change in bottle and they'll start to drop the fruit a little bit. They'll come into a whole different flavor profile as they age. But the other question, I think what you're asking was, yes, about 2020. I think it's a great year. I think 17 was one of our best years, actually, up until the fire. And luckily we picked it at the fire or before the fire. So we were very good. The 16 was a very ripe year for us. We allowed the fruit we pulled in a little bit earlier, but it all just depends. And I think it's very hard for me not only you can read a vintage report and say, oh, well, it was a hot year and most of the wines are going to taste a little bit riper in style. But I think until you try the wines next to each other, and again, it's kind of hard to say a wine that I had 6 months ago compared to the current vintage. I think it's a matter of what you have in front of you and how much bottle time it has. And I think this 2017 is still such a baby. This wine, I mean, we get it every single year. People call us 1 year to the date when they bought that wine, and we no longer have the wine available, but the wine is completely changed and is just, really shining in a whole different world.